The incident that rocked the banking industry began as a simple interaction between a black CEO and a bank manager. Yet, what seemed like an isolated event would spiral into something much larger, exposing the ugly reality of systemic racism within corporate institutions. A successful black entrepreneur walked into a prestigious bank, expecting nothing more than the typical professional service that anyone in his position would receive. Instead, he was met with hostility and refusal, a denial that left him questioning his place in society. And just like that, the seemingly innocuous moment triggered a storm, leaving the bank's reputation in tatters. The consequences of the bank manager's actions sent shockwaves not only through the financial industry, but also through communities already weary of discrimination and inequality. This was not just a case of one person being denied service. It was a stark reminder that racism remains deeply embedded in the systems that govern our society, shaping people's lives in ways that are often invisible until they explode into the public eye. The story begins on a warm afternoon when James Douglas, the CEO of a leading tech company, arrived at his local branch to conduct some routine business. James had built his company from the ground up, overcoming countless obstacles as a black entrepreneur in a field where diversity is still lacking. Yet, his experience with the bank that day was nothing short of shocking. Upon entering, James was immediately treated differently. Despite his well-tailored suit and calm demeanor, the bank manager, a middle-aged white man named Richard Masters, treated him with obvious disdain. At first, it was subtle, a slow walk to the counter, a lack of eye contact, and a tense smile. But when James asked for assistance with a transfer, the manager hesitated, then outright refused, claiming that the bank couldn't process his request without further verification. James was stunned. He had been a loyal customer for years and had never once encountered such treatment. His mind raced. Was this really happening? In a flash, he realized that this wasn't a mistake. It was something more sinister. This was racial discrimination masked as a procedural error, an all too familiar experience for people of color who find themselves at the mercy of a biased system. As James stood there, feeling the weight of the injustice bearing down on him, he couldn't help but wonder how many others had faced similar treatment. Silent victims of an invisible force that controlled every aspect of their lives. Was this the price of success in a world that still saw color before character? What followed next was nothing short of a public outcry. Within hours, the story was all over social media, spreading like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, with people across the world expressing their outrage. The response was swift, and people were angry, not just at the actions of the bank manager, but at the culture that allowed such behavior to go unchecked for so long. One social media post read, "This is not just about one person being denied service. This is about a system that continues to perpetuate racism at every level." Another shared, "How many of us have experienced this and remained silent? This is a wake-up call for all of us." The hashtag racism in banking trended for days, and calls for accountability flooded the bank's social media channels. Some people were quick to call for boycotts of the bank, while others demanded a thorough investigation into the actions of the manager and the broader practices of the institution. As James Douglas' story gained momentum, it resonated with countless others who had similar tales of discrimination to share. Many saw themselves in his shoes, feeling as though their achievements had been discounted, their talents dismissed, and their worth undervalued simply because of the color of their skin. The bank, caught in the middle of the storm, was forced to act quickly, but instead of responding with genuine contrition, their initial statement only fueled the flames of public anger. The statement read, "We regret any inconvenience caused and will be reviewing our internal procedures to ensure this does not happen again." To many, this sounded hollow and dismissive, an attempt at damage control rather than an acknowledgement of the deeper issues at play. Public trust in the bank began to erode as customers questioned whether they were being treated equally. It wasn't until the board of directors stepped in that the bank took real action. The bank CEO, in a rare public statement, expressed deep regret for the incident and announced that the bank manager, Richard Masters, had been terminated immediately. This was an unexpected move, swift, decisive, and somewhat shocking in a commitment to holding someone accountable for their actions. The firing of the manager was seen as a victory for James and others who had been subjected to similar discrimination. But it also raised a more pressing question. Was this one incident, or was there a pattern of discriminatory behavior within the bank's leadership? As the public's attention turned toward the incident, investigations into the bank's practices began to take shape. The response from the public was clear. They wanted answers. Was the bank's culture of discrimination isolated to one manager, or was it an institutional problem that ran deeper? Reports began to surface that hinted at a darker pattern. Employees who worked at various branches shared stories of unspoken biases that influenced hiring practices, customer interactions, and even promotions. Whispers of discriminatory policies and unwritten rules that treated people of color differently from their white counterparts filled the air. An anonymous source within the bank's HR department revealed that black employees were often passed over for promotions, with management opting for culturally comfortable candidates instead. Meanwhile, senior executives, who were overwhelmingly white, held on to their positions for years, perpetuating a cycle that excluded qualified black professionals from rising through the ranks. As more evidence of systemic racism within the bank began to surface, the public's anger shifted from focusing solely on the fired bank manager to addressing the broader, more insidious practices of the institution. For James Douglas, the incident was not just a painful reminder of the prejudice that still exists in the world. It was a pivotal moment that forever changed his relationship with institutions he had once trusted. His experience, however, led to a greater sense of purpose. He took his story public, speaking at rallies and forums to shed light on the systemic issues affecting black professionals across various industries. For Richard Masters, the former bank manager, the firing was just the beginning. The once respected employee now faced public scorn, job loss, and the fallout from his actions. What followed was a series of personal repercussions, as his reputation was tarnished beyond repair. Masters' story became a cautionary tale for others in similar positions, an example of how the smallest of actions could have a far-reaching impact. Yet, the true lesson came not from the fall of one man, but from the collective effort of a community that refused to stand idly by. The bank's firing of Masters was only a small part of a much larger story, a story that demanded systemic change across industries, especially in financial institutions that hold the power to shape people's lives in profound ways. As the dust settled and the bank tried to recover from the public relations nightmare, one thing became clear. There was no going back to the status quo. The incident had exposed a truth that could no longer be ignored. And for James Douglas, the journey of self-empowerment and social activism had just begun. Through his actions, James reminded the world that standing against racial injustice requires not just bravery, but the willingness to take on the systems that perpetuate inequality. His story was not just one of personal adversity. It was a beacon for change.